Hello, I'm Mary Wells, Education Director with Sycamore Land Trust. I want to thank you all for joining us for Discover the Awe of Birdwatching, a conversation with ornithologist and best-selling author, John C. Robinson. This is part of our Conservation Conversations lecture series, where we hear from authors and local experts who inspire us to get involved in conservation. Our next conversation, It Takes a Village to Raise a Chick, is August 11th with Allison Marie Gillett, our state ornithologist with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. You can sign up to attend at sycamorelandtrust.org/conversations. And you can also find recordings from this series available on this webpage. So Sycamore Land Trust is a nonprofit conservation organization, and we were founded in 1990. Our service area is this very large portion of southern Indiana, 26 counties, and we currently protect 122 properties totaling over 10,000 acres. This is a photo of an egret at our Eagle Slough natural area in Evansville, taken by Steve Gifford. And so just an introduction, our mission is to preserve the beauty, health, and diversity of southern Indiana's natural landscape through strategic land conservation and environmental education. Our work is powered by over 1,300 members and more than 350 volunteers. We maintain over 30 miles of public hiking trails at 13 of our nature preserves here in southern Indiana, including our beautiful Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve, and which is where I've got this photo of a recent visit with Girls Inc. here in Bloomington. Our environmental education program connects thousands of people of all ages to nature through guided hikes and free outdoor nature programming. Sycamore protects land that's over 10,000 acres here in southern Indiana, now protected forever, thanks to the work of Sycamore and our supporters. This is an aerial photo of our Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve. This is part of our Bean Blossom Creek Conservation Area that's just north of Bloomington, where we're based. It's a priority area here for Sycamore. We're protecting over 2,000 acres of wetlands and other critical habitat along this corridor. We also restore habitat. Our land stewardship efforts include controlling invasive plants, restoring wetlands, planting thousands of native trees and other types of native plants. Through these efforts, Sycamore is helping to preserve and restore southern Indiana's biodiversity for future generations. Sycamore's nature preserves are home to many at-risk and declining species here in Indiana, and they depend on this habitat for survival. It's especially true for our wetland preserves, such as Bean Blossom Bottoms. Here's just a few of our species that depend on this wetland, including we have the purple fringeless orchid, Henslow's sparrow, Indiana bat, bobcat, bald eagle, the Kirtland snake, cypress firefly, American bittern, and so many more. This is a lovely photo of the state endangered Virginia rail. It was spotted at one of our preserves in April of last year. This photo is by Scott Evans. In addition to protecting land and restoring habitat, an important part of Sycamore's mission is to connect people to nature. One way we do that is by maintaining over 30 miles of public hiking trail at our 13 preserves that are open to the public. We also connect people through our environmental education program. We provide free outdoor education to local schools, community groups, and also Sycamore supporters. And then just to give you a little background, our education program was founded in 2005 to connect all sorts of people of all different ages to nature and inspire the next generation of conservationists. So since our beginning of our program, we've reached over, that's a big number, 35,000 people through our programming, and We hope to reach many more. So feel free to get in touch with me. I'm Mary Wells, Education Director. You can reach me at mary@sycamorelandtrust.org. So yeah, if you have any questions, get in touch. You can visit sycamorelandtrust.org/explore and then request a free nature preserve guide with our trail maps and our public preserves. And now I am pleased to welcome John C. Robinson. John is a little bit of background, is a professional ornithologist, keynote speaker, and environmental consultant. He holds a BS in biology from Iowa State University and a 2-time #1 best-selling author. He has published 6 books about nature and birds, including an annotated checklist of the birds of Tennessee, North American Bird Reference Book, and Tweet, Flutter, and Squawk. And he has also led professional birding and natural history tours to South Africa and numerous locations within the United States. Since 1999, John has been an advocate for minorities in birdwatching and nature and has conducted research on how to connect our youth and young adults to nature through the magic of birdwatching. He has worked in collaboration with Toyota and the National Audubon Society and continues to travel across the country speaking about his landmark book, Birding for Everyone, encouraging people of color to become bird watchers. John, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us. I'll stop sharing my screen now and turn this over to you.
All right, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Let me get my slides up on the screen and take just a moment here. Okay. And just to confirm, you can see the slides now, right?
Yep, looking good.
Yes,
perfect. Okay, so what I will be discussing today is how youth and adults of all ages can become motivated to discover and appreciate nature through bird watching. And people who are watching this, they will learn how anyone can get started on their journey to becoming a birder and or improve their birding skills. Now, as part of this presentation, I will also be highlighting some of the unique challenges faced by youth and young adults in underprivileged communities in terms of how they get connected to nature and the outdoors. And finally, I'll also be sharing some valuable tips for some of the seasoned birders in the audience that'll help you to identify birds by sight and by sound. So we have a lot for everyone here, which is really a lot of fun. Okay, but first, I want to share with you a stellar phenomenon which took place on June 24th, 2022. This was the day that 5 planets, the 5 planets that are visible to the naked eye, they put on a performance that has not been witnessed in 18 years. So there was Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and they were all simultaneously visible, arranged in almost a straight line, and also positioned in their natural order from the sun. So I got up at 3:45 a.m. on that day. I drove to a high area near my house with an unobstructed view of the eastern horizon. And here for the next hour, I marveled at this sight. And I captured this photograph, which includes Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, along with the moon. All I can say about this was an awesome, almost a spine-tingling experience. And I mention it because just like this single event, which by the way was advertised in advance in the media, but just like this single event will cause many young people to take up an interest in astronomy, we too can leverage similar experiences that are happening right now in the woods, rivers, fields, and parks all around us. And we can leverage those experiences to get people excited about nature and the outdoors, particularly bird watching. So I'll explain how we do that on the next few slides. So let's get started. So I invite you to think back to a recent morning in early May, somewhere on an open woodland trail in eastern North America. You're walking along and suddenly you hear it. and the bird finally comes into view. And when you see this with its raw, harsh beauty, it stops you in your tracks. And you ask, how? How can this tiny woodland bird be so magnificently stunning in its appearance? This image becomes permanently seared into your memory. And years later, as an avid birder, you will refer to this moment as the day you encountered your spark bird, the bird that sparked your interest in birdwatching. This is the Indigo Bunting. It's one of the most abundant songbirds in Eastern North America. And yet many people who rarely spend time in nature are not even aware of its existence. So let's now examine what the sighting of the 5 planets and this Indigo Bunting, let's examine what they both have in common. So to begin, let's take a pop quiz. So if I challenge you to go out and do something right now, something that would have a transformational, life-changing, positive impact on nature, but you only had 120 seconds to make it happen, what could you accomplish in those 2 minutes? Now, while you're contemplating that question, I'd like to tell you a story. And it's a story about how a teacher accomplished this very thing in just 120 seconds. It's the story of a boy who attended a middle school, but he never read any books. And his 6th grade library teacher noticed this and asked him why he wasn't reading any of the books there. And he replied, "None of these books interest me." So the teacher asked him, "Well, what does interest you?" And that's when he began talking about the spiders and the crawfish and the butterflies that he would play with in his backyard. So the teacher got a smile on her face. You probably know that smile. It's the smile that adults get when they figure the child out. And she went over to the bookshelf, got a book, retrieved it, and gave it to him. And she said, "Here, read this." And it was Jack London's Call of the Wild. Now that boy took the book home and he began reading it, and something amazing happened. He couldn't put the book down. And a couple days later, he went running back to her and said, "Do you have any more books like this?" And there came that smile again, this time because the teacher knew she had him. And she went back over to the bookshelf, got the companion book by Jack London, which was White Fang, and gave it to him and asked him to read that as well. All right, now what's really happening there is this boy read that book and he developed a vision. And he realized that his vision, when he became an adult, he envisioned that he would be a biologist, study wolves, and live in Alaska. That teacher practically gave him 3 gifts that day. Number 1, an interest in reading. Number 2, a motivation to explore his curiosity around nature. But number 3, she believed in him. That boy was me. And my life changed in ways that I can only imagine as a result of this one encounter. But most importantly, she did it all in 120 seconds. And that's the part that I want you to remember. So ponder over that for just a moment. She simply touched me with kindness and gave me all that I have today. So fast forward to 1979. I had held my vision for 9 years. And around January of that year, my college advisor asked to speak to me. And he asked me what my goals were. And I told him, well, I want to become a biologist, study wolves, and live in Alaska. And he reminded me that he had heard me say that over and over again. And then he asked why I had not yet signed up for the ornithology class. And I said, "Orno, what? What's that?" And he said, ornithology, it's the study of birds. And I told him I didn't want to take that course. I was only interested in wolves. Well, his response was very simple. He said, you must take it. It's one of the mandatory courses in your curriculum. So if you want to graduate, take this course. So kicking and screaming, I was dragged into the Iowa State University ornithology class in the spring of 1979. So now, this is when it happened. The month was March 1979. My ornithology professor entered the classroom on the very first day of class, and he walked to the podium and he began his lecture. And one of the first things he told us, he said, there are, known to man at that time, there are 8,600 different species of birds worldwide. I heard that number and I went, wow, 8,600. And here I was studying to become a professional biologist, and I only knew about 5 of those species by name. And something transformational happened to me at that point. I was never able to put a name to it until I actually attended a lecture at the UC Berkeley campus in 2015. But that was the day I wanted to find out everything I could about the 8,595 species of birds that I never knew existed. And I became a student of birds, their identification, their songs, their habitats, their conservation needs. This was the only class I ever took where I was actually sad when it ended. So I decided to never let it end. And there has not been a day since May 1979 when I haven't thought about birds in some meaningful way. So in short, on that first day of class, when I heard the number 8,600, I was in awe. And you see, that's the equivalent of the 5-planet moment. That's the equivalent of the Indigo Bunting moment that I described earlier. So what is awe? Well, like I said, I first found out about it in 2015, and psychologists really only began seriously studying it about 19 years ago. And by definition, all experiences involving awe have 2 essential central features in common. Number 1, there is this perceived vastness. And number 2 is a need for accommodation. So vastness is more than just the literal meaning of size. It includes stimuli that are perceptually or conceptually vast. And in the presence of something like that, we sense how small we are. And that's when we experience this need for accommodation. And this describes the process whereby our conception of the world, it needs to shift or expand in order to make sense of this new experience. And this matches the emotional experience I was going through in March 1979 when I heard the number 8,600. And I literally have no other way to rationalize how I so quickly went from my vision of 9 years wanting to study wolves and live in Alaska, how I went from that so quickly to a new direction in life, which is my all-consuming thirst for knowledge about birds. And something else that was included in Keltner and Haight's landmark 2003 article, they mentioned that nature is a particularly prominent elicitor of awe, which means we can tap into it as well, especially we as environmental educators. So now that we've been studying it, we have some initial findings that we can see. And one of the studies in 2010, it used some qualitative interviews and content analysis to explore the functions and the mechanisms of awe as it's experienced in outdoor settings. And the findings indicated that awe as we experience it in the outdoors, it seems to offer a wide variety of not only social, but emotional and psychological benefits that contribute to the quality of life. And one of the main themes that were identified is that awe increases respect of nature. It can also facilitate learning, but it can also draw people back to the outdoors. And in this case, the bond with nature may be more broad in that sense. In the sense that when people experience awe in the outdoors, it simply creates a bond to nature in a global sense and draws them to the outdoors in general. And it's important to note that many of the researchers are beginning to believe that awe also has the capacity to change the course of a life in a profound and permanent way. And I truly believe that's one of the things that happened to me, and I've seen it happen to many of the students that I have worked with as well. So interestingly, just about 6 weeks ago, I got my United Healthcare Renew magazine in the mail, and it featured a story about awe. And the article highlighted some of the important health problems that we commonly see today: heart disease, diabetes, depression. And it highlighted that one of the causes that leads to these conditions is inflammation. And inflammation, in turn, can be brought about by an increased level of stress. So the question becomes, is there a way, could we possibly build a wall or a barrier or perhaps a shield that blocks this increase in stress? Well, perhaps we can. There was a 2021 study published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology that showed that contact with nature, even if it's only viewed from indoors through our windows, but contact with nature can increase positive feelings, leading to a reduction in stress. And that's why many researchers now are looking at how awe, which can come from contact with nature, can lead to better health. So when I look at this in myself, I look at my life that I've lived, 25-year career as an ornithologist working with the federal government. I look at how I had the opportunity to publish 6 books about birds, nature, and the outdoors. I've always practiced this healthy mindset, positive mindset, relaxed state, very reduced stress levels. And all the decisions that I make, from the lawn care products that I choose to put on my lawn, to the foods that I eat, the organic foods that I eat, or the environmental causes that I choose to support. I see myself all throughout the left-hand side of this slide. And when I think about many of the young and adult nature enthusiasts who I interviewed when I was writing my book, they exhibited many of these same themes that I just mentioned, again, that reside on the left-hand side of this slide. So now we see how we have the opportunity to use awe to help people become a bird watcher. So the question now becomes well, how do we take that next step? And if you spend any time on Amazon, you'll see that there's many books about how to become a birder. But if I were to reduce this down to just the essential elements, this would be my take on it. Number one, you have to develop some level of interest. Now, you could do that on your own serendipitously, like the 5-planet moment or the Indigo Bunting moment that I shared earlier. However, more often than not, a person's interest in birding will start because somebody introduced it to them. Next, we look at the hardware. So if you really want to become a birder, the only thing you need is a good pair of binoculars. And a good entry-level pair of binoculars, you can get one of those for less than $200. They're very affordable. if you wanted to, you could expand to a tripod, a spotting scope, a camera with various telephoto lenses, but all of those are optional. The next thing we look at is the software. So in the 1990s, when we talked about software, we were usually referring to some type of a bird listing database software or multimedia program that presented information about birds in some type of encyclopedic format. However, we're no longer in the 90s. Now it's 2022, and you'll find that nearly all of those functions can be found online at various websites, and many of those websites are now free. Technical references is another piece. You want to start by getting an easy to use field guide. The one that I recommend a lot is Birds of North America by Ken Kaufman. I think that it's really great for people who are just starting out. And I think what you'll find is that you could go beyond that if you wanted to. And as with the software, there are many optional reference books that you could acquire in addition to that. But again, it's all optional. But you'll also find that in contrast to buying the books, much of the content that's in the books has moved onto the internet. So it's online where it may be available again to you for free or for a nominal fee. And last, we have a network of friends. I want to recognize this because birding has always and continues to be a social event. And part of the fun with birding is sharing the discovery of a rare bird or a rare bird experience, sharing that with someone who enjoys looking at birds as much as you. So in the 1980s and 1990s, this network of friends was focused usually around where you lived. It may have included local, regional, or state-specific birding clubs. But as we've seen with others, things on this list, it's now 2022. And we now have apps like Facebook and Skype and Zoom, and all of these different apps have allowed this network of friends to be literally distributed anywhere in the world, usually at no cost to you. Okay, so now we've learned a little bit about how we can become a birder. So now we're ready to start identifying the birds that we see. And I teach a 10-step method for identifying birds. One of those steps is birding by ear, so listening to the sounds that birds make. But the other steps are all visual cues. And there we're looking at how does the bird behave? What colors does the bird have? What habitat is it in? And all of these different things usually involve some visual element or cue. And we might be looking at the crown, the legs, the eye color, the bill color, the size of the bill, the shape of the bill. And I've pointed out many of the things that we look at when we're trying to identify a bird on this screen. But one of the steps, as I mentioned, involves learning how to identify birds by the sound it makes. And birding by ear is the only step in this system that I teach that can actually function without the need for any visual input. And that is part of about what makes that particular skill so unique. So I'll give you some examples of birding by sound later in this presentation. So now, armed with all of the above, I guess we're ready to jump into birding, right? Well, not so fast. We have one more thing to consider. You see, many people have asked me how I got started and became a bird watcher. And I wish that you could have been with me the first time that an environmental educator told me how bird watching worked. And as you know by now, I was in Iowa. I was attending Iowa State University. And this person told me, you take these, walk around the neighborhood with all these nice homes, and you look for these. It seemed so simple, and I could hear what she was saying to me, but in my mind, I was having my own conversation, and it went something like this. Okay, so let me get this straight. You want me, an African-American male, to take these binoculars and go walk around the streets with all these beautiful homes looking into people's backyards. Talk about a scary thought. I wasn't sure I was up to it, at least not just yet. And the origin of this fear was twofold. Number one, what if people saw me, thought I was up to something, and called the authorities? And number two, I felt like I needed permission to be doing this, because when I looked around at all the other birders, I saw no one who looked like me. And I began to wonder if maybe Black people were not supposed to be doing this. This fear was so overwhelming that I developed a coping mechanism. I would go birding, but I wouldn't let anyone know I was birding because my binoculars were hidden. Then when I found a bird I wanted to look at, out came the binoculars because they were hidden in my jacket. I would take a quick look, and when I was done, the binoculars went into hiding again. And then I would take out my bird field identification guide to study what I had seen. And this actually continued for about 2 to 3 years. There were so many opportunities where I could have just given up if I had not been so interested in birds. There were so many reasons why I could have or should have stopped if I didn't have this intense desire to learn more about birds. So I want to introduce you to this idea of permission, because that's really what I've just been talking about. And one day, everything changed. And I'm sure every one of you who are bird watchers who are watching this, every one of you who are birders can remember the most recent time you went birding and the specific location that you visited. But let me ask you this. Did you ask permission to go? You see, I struggled with this for years until 1983, when I realized that I could make a contribution to the birding community. Up to that point, I had continually questioned whether I truly had anything to contribute to the greater birding community, nearly all the members of which didn't look like me. And fortunately, all of that changed in the spring of 1983 in the Appalachian Hill Country of West Virginia. And that was when I went birding with a couple local birders who, by their own words, had never met a Black birdwatcher before. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to tell that full story today, but I will share with you that the most pivotal moment in my birding career occurred a couple hours after I met them, when I helped them identify a pine warbler, a bird that had eluded them for years in their local community. So you can read all about that experience in my book, Birding for Everyone. It's in chapter 3, appropriately titled, Guess Who's Coming to Bird? And as it would turn out, 1983 was the time when suddenly I went from someone who did not fit in to someone who did fit in. And that was when I realized that I was actually needed by the birding community. I felt accepted. Okay, now taking this idea of permission one step further, I like to share with you where I got it from. And I like to introduce you to a man who helped me to understand this more completely. And it was based on my work with Thomas Cleaver that I gained the belief that birding and nature are for everyone to experience and enjoy. And to emphasize this point, I'd like to introduce you to Thomas Cleaver Jr., who allowed me to explore the power of permission even further. So I'll just briefly go through one page of this book, Birding for Everyone, and talk about Thomas Cleaver. First thing is that we want to remember is he was a master naturalist, an avid gardener, and birdwatcher. And he used those interests to teach others, particularly city inner city youngsters to appreciate nature and sports. And he worked with a colleague named Carlotta Hargrove, and they established a youth program in the San Antonio Parks and Recreation Department. And together, he and Carlotta helped these kids to learn the importance of setting and reaching goals through activities like tennis, taekwondo, and birding. Now, when I heard of the research that he was doing, or the work that he was doing, I remember giving him a phone call and being with him on the telephone that day. And this is what he told me. We have at least 5 10s and 5 10 to 13-year-olds, but as they age into their teens, they tend to lose self-actuated motivation to be actively involved. That is, they will go birding, but they rarely ask to go. And that's when we started talking about permission. And that's when it clicked, because I remember having those same thoughts as I was when I was young. And so that's when I decided to work with him. So they were part of this program called the Fairchild Warblers. And so I gave them $1,000 in 2002. That was my donation that year. And they were competing in this statewide contest called the Great Texas Birding Classic. And they won. They came in first place. And then the next year they did it again. So the kids that were a year older were helping the new kids coming into the program. So Thomas Cleaver was not only a mentor and a role model for the kids, but the older kids were now role models for the younger kids. So based on this conversation I had with Thomas Cleaver, I told him that I wanted to use his work when I finished my book. And in 2005, I tried to contact him, but I was not able to reach him. I did a Google search online, and I was devastated by what I had found. I found actually a tribute to him, because he had died at the age of 57 on September 15th, 2004. And the tribute that I found said that no man ever stands so tall as when he stoops to help a child. I knew in that moment that I would dedicate my book to him, and I continued working with his partner, Carlotta, and I actually had an opportunity to visit the Youth with High Potential program in San Antonio in November 2008. This was after the book came out. Now, prior to this picture being taken, not one of these kids had ever gone birding before. But you would never have known that based on how positively they reacted to me and how interested they were in looking at all the birds. And I truly believe I left them with this message that they don't need permission to continue their nature study. And we as environmental educators, we should try to do the same every time we interact with a youth or young adult within our sphere of influence. Okay, now let's shift gears a little bit. We've learned how to become a birder, what we need to be a birder, and now we're into identifying the birds. I want to touch on one of the techniques, which is how to identify them by sound. And again, as I said, identifying birds by sound, it's part of a 10-step process that I've taught as part of an online course, which is covered in more depth in my book, Tweet, Flutter, and Squawk. But I consider this to be the best and the most important bird identification technique. I think you'll be surprised at how many birds can actually be identified on the basis of sound alone. Yet, I will also admit that for many people, it is one of the most difficult techniques to master. So as we go through some of the next few slides, we'll talk about the awe of bird watching, and we'll introduce some opportunities to learn about how these birds sound. Okay, so I call these the profiles in the awe of bird watching. When I decided that I was going to move from the Eastern United States to the Western United States, one of the birds that I was hoping one day I would get to see would be the American dipper. This bird lives in rock bottom streams and rivers in the western US. It has an overall dark gray plumage, but what's amazing about this bird is it can walk underwater when it's searching for food. And I will tell you, I had one of those Indigo Bunting moments the very first time I saw this bird after I moved to the Western United States. It was one of my most sought after birds in my entire life. The next one that I'd like to introduce you to is the Prairie Warbler. This is a bird that you'll find in brushy fields and second growth habitats. It has a lot of yellow underparts with black streaking. But one of the things that you'll notice about this bird is that it frequently wags its tail. And not all warblers do that. And it's kind of neat when I look at a behavior like that, and suddenly you take all these warblers and you've narrowed it down to like 2 or 3. But the most interesting thing about this bird is the song. And so I'd like to play the song for you now. So this is the song of the Prairie Warbler. Okay, now that's the song of the Prairie Warbler. They sometimes talk about that bird having a song that goes up a chromatic scale. So that when you hear that bird, it creates a wonderful memory, and you'll never forget that song once you hear it. All right, the next one that I want to talk about is the OliveSided Flycatcher. So the OliveSided Flycatcher, this is a bird that has gray olive sides, has a white streak down the middle of its chest, but more importantly, it perches in dead snags. And if it's not perching in a dead snag, it's perching on the dead limb of a live tree. Now, what's interesting is you can pick up any field identification guide. You can go to the page where the OliveSided Flycatcher is listed. And part of the identification that is listed there is it perches on these dead snags. And I thought, how weird that they mention this in every field guide. Well, I've been watching birds now for 43 years. And there's never been a time in those 43 years when I have not seen this bird perched in a dead snag or on the dead limb of a live tree. The persistence that it has to adhere to this same behavior over and over and over again, the hundreds of times that I witnessed this bird, is just amazing. And it leaves me in awe every time that I see it. And finally, we get to one of my favorite birds, which is the Louisiana water thrush. Like the American dipper, it prefers rock bottom streams and creeks, but you'll find this one in the eastern US. You have a cousin called the northern water thrush. So you want to look at the eyebrow and the throat, because there are markings on the eyebrow and throat that help you to distinguish between these two. But what's really neat about water thrushes is that when you find them, they bob their entire rear end up and down. It is so comical to watch. And you just don't see many birds that do this. And when you do, it leaves an impression upon you. So let's listen now to the amazing song of the Louisiana water thrush. And let me pull that up here. I always call that the see you, teritirit song. and that is the Louisiana water thrush. This bird also arrives very early in the spring. It's one of the earliest migrant warblers that you'll see. So that is the Louisiana water thrush. And now that we've given you an idea of what songs are like, I'd like to introduce you to a bird song primer where you can actually take some of the tips that I've been teaching you and now apply it to a collection of birds, many of which might be confusing, but then you learn how to distinguish them as you listen to them. So we're going to choose the gray catbird, the brown thrasher, and the northern mockingbird. So we're going to start with the catbird and then move on from there. And what I'm going to do is just show you how you can take these birds and actually begin to identify certain things that they're doing, and you can distinguish one song from another. So when you listen to the gray catbird, what you're hearing is it sings a note, and then it goes and sings a different note, and then it sings a different sounding note, and it sings each of these notes one time before going to the next one. So let's listen to the gray catbird. Okay, so now we have an idea of how it just takes one note and then switches to a different one. When we look at the brown thrasher, this bird, on the other hand, sings a note, and then it sings it twice, and then it goes and does a different note and sings that twice. So let's listen to the brown thrasher with its song. So now we hear each note is repeated twice, and then it goes on and sings a different note and repeats that twice. The mockingbird ups the ante a little bit, and it repeats each note 5 or 6 times. And so when we listen to the northern mockingbird, we can begin to hear that as well. So what you can do is you can take each of these, you can take those examples that I just gave, and you can begin to think about, okay, as I'm listening to these birds, how do I tell them apart from one another? And you can begin to apply that same technique with different groups of birds. So you can apply it to American robin, red-eyed vireo, scarlet tanager, and so forth. And you can group all of the birds that sound similar to one another and begin using this process to tease apart how they actually sound differently once you compare them to each other. Okay, so to wrap this up, when I look at my story and my work and how I went from someone who doubted he had anything to contribute at all to seeing all the work that I've done to give back, first of all, I know I'm not done. I know my story is still being told, and there are chapters that are not yet written. But more importantly, I ask, how can we get others to make similar contributions? And this should be why we celebrate diversity in the outdoors and why we should encourage it through our education and outreach programs and try to get as many different people from all walks of life to become interested in nature and the outdoors, preferably through birdwatching. Because as an author once said in bird conservation, when more people of us are each doing his or her part, we all contribute to the greater good. And that author was me. And this is a slide showing some of the work I did in collaboration with Toyota and the National Audubon Society as part of the Together Green Fellowship about just over a decade ago. So I'd like to thank a lot of people who helped get me to the point where I am right now. Of course, my mother is very important. My wife, who's been very supportive of all my work for over 20 years. And David Nkosi, who is a guide that I used when I went to South Africa. And he was a Zulu birder in South Africa, and he introduced me to a lot of the South African birds there and many of the other people whose photographs were used in this presentation. So as I think back on all the different slides here, you probably have a lot of questions right now, and this would be a great time to open it up for questions. So let me see what questions have come in, and we can go from there.
Thank you, John, so much for your presentation. It was delightful. Thank you.
Okay.
And we do have some questions, and I'll just start off because I'm so glad you talked about bird songs. It's the hardest thing for me, obviously, as for many people. But I would love to know what your favorite bird song or call is in North America, and then also the world, based on your many years of enjoyment of birding.
Okay, yeah. So that one actually is an easy one, because my favorite song in North America and the world is the same. And that would be the Bachman sparrow, which is a bird that's found in the southeastern United States. Its song is, to me, the most beautiful one in the world. So let's listen to it. So that one, I traveled for 6 hours in a car to see my very first Bachman sparrow. And when I got out of the car and I finally heard it sing, it was one of those Indigo Bunting moments that I've talked about.
Thank you. It is a beautiful bird song. I think there's some other questions that come in. I'm going to just let some people unmute themselves and ask their questions.
Okay. Yes.
Hey, John. John Lawrence, Executive Director, Sycamore Land Trust. Thanks again so much for being here. I've got a question or two, and if you don't, I hope you don't mind if I add some comments. Wow, this was great. Where to begin? I have a lot of notes right here.
Okay.
One thing was, you mentioned Guess Who's Coming to Bird. I would hope everyone out there gets the reference to the, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with the amazing Sidney Poitier.
Yes.
If not, go watch the movie. Great reference. You mentioned also about permission to bird, and I felt that myself, and I just hope this makes some kind of sense. Like, I'm a white guy in an area of just white people, but like sometimes I feel kind of weird walking around with binoculars, and I can only imagine how that might feel if I was of a different background. So I, for what's worth, that's a thing, and I just wanted to share that. Like, yeah, it's like I want to go out there and see the birds and stuff, but sometimes you feel like, oh, am I being creepy or something, or and that's when I'm part of the part of the racial background around here. So that's easy for me to worry about, but even harder for others. So another thing I just wanted to share too, that I really appreciate when you talked about a spark bird, because that really is what got me to where I am today with Sycamore Land Trust. A good friend, Scott Evans, he'll probably watch this. When I was a kid, I was interested in birds, and fun to watch them at the feeders. Ken didn't go anywhere, but when I was an adult, my friend Scott took me birding, and we went out up in northern Indiana, and I saw a yellow warbler for the first time.
Mm.
At least I remember. And I was like, wow, what an amazing bird. You've seen them. For
Mm.
people who haven't seen them, they're just all, the males are all just total yellow with a little red necklace. And it's like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this bird before. And then I saw one, and I saw another one, and another one, and it's just like, wow, this is a total different world that I'm not aware of. And you mentioned awe. I wrote that down, and that's really what I felt. A sense
Mhm.
of awe, and hey, got me motivated to go back to college and get a degree, and here we are. Um, gosh, what else here? Um, well, let me get back to questions. You touch on this a little bit earlier, and I know this is certainly something when I was getting into birding. Of course, 20 some years ago, things have changed a bit, but it's all the more a good question of like, what kind of birding equipment and technology do you recommend to those who are just getting started? I know when I got started, trying to pick out binoculars was a big deal, and now it's they're a lot more. And so
Yeah, so 1979 obviously was when I got started, and what's available today is so many light years ahead of what was available back then. But I recommend the Nikon Pro Staff 3S. Nikon Pro Staff 3S. The 8x42 is a perfect size. The 10 power binoculars can sometimes be a little heavy for some women to use, but the 8x42 is perfect. It still gives you a great exit pupil. So the size of the bird coming into your retina is large enough, and it's lightweight enough that both men and women can use it well. So that would be what I would recommend. If you're just getting started, you really shouldn't be thinking about sinking a lot of money into tripods and spotting scopes and cameras. Just start with the binoculars, and that would be the one that I would recommend. For your field identification guide, I would go with the Field Guide to the Birds of North America by Ken Kaufman, and really use that. Now, you mentioned technology, and I'll admit, I'll be the first to admit, I am a former computer programmer. I have written software programs like that software program that I showed you, which is this one here. This one I wrote probably, and I think it came out in 1999. So I built this whole program myself. I know a little bit of things about computer code, but that being said, I draw a hard line when I get to going out in the field. And when I'm in the field, I'd like to experience nature, and I'd like it to be without any technology. So I don't use any apps or anything when I'm in the field, because I want to experience nature in the raw. It's like people who eat raw food. They don't want it to be heated or anyway. I'm that way with bird watching. I don't want any technology to be interfering with my experience with nature. So I am not a techno person when it comes to bird watching. I don't take any apps or technology in the field. I know there's a lot of things out there. I just don't use them.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I would just add from my experience, sometimes people assume that more magnification is better. And I think, and you can comment, but, when you're getting binoculars, probably 7 or, 8 magnification is a lot better than 10, because it's just easier to, you need a greater field of view
Yeah.
to find the bird, versus getting some little closer view of them.
I have a question. Hi, John. My name is Ellen Bergen, and I'm the Land Stewardship Assistant with Sycamore Land Trust.
Okay.
I guess I want to say thank you again for being here. I know we're all so fortunate to have your knowledge and guidance with us tonight. So working as a land steward, I spend a lot of my time and began to learn my birds through working outside a ton in southern Indiana. So I was wondering if, have you ever had the chance to visit Indiana for birding? And if so, what time of year and what was your favorite bird that you observed while you were here?
Yeah, all of those are great questions. And yes, I've been in Indiana. However, it was always en route to and from Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised. So I was usually driving through Indiana on the way to either Tennessee or Iowa. I think I did record a few bird observations over the years, but I was never there for more than just a transitory few hours. And I don't have those bird observations available because they would have been over 30 years ago. So unfortunately, I don't have many in the way of records, but I have watched birds in Indiana. Yes.
Great, thank you.
So let me ask you this: what is your favorite bird in Indiana?
Oh gosh, that is such a great question. You know what?
American bittern.
It is, it's the tree swallow.
The tree swallow. Okay. Yeah.
I love the iridescence of the blue on their back and how stark of a contrast it is to the white of their undersides. And we have several bluebird, well, initially they're put up as bluebird boxes at one of our properties. But we have both bluebirds and tree swallows who have been nesting in them. So I've been able to see their young go from like the parents first arriving at the box to the nest to the eggs and then to the young and then seeing them back to fledge the last few years. So they've developed a really like a soft spot. Yeah, so I have a really big soft spot for them. And you know, you got to become fond of a bird when they dive bomb you every single time you get close to their nest. Yeah.
Well, you know, what's interesting about the tree swallow is that there's beauty in the spring, as you said, when you see them first in the spring, just the contrast between the top part of their plumage and the undersides is just an amazing contrast. It's just remarkable how beautiful they are. But in the fall, I think what part of the beauty is of that particular species is they get together in large numbers and form these large flocks. And if you're in the right place at the right time, the size of these migrating flocks as they're heading back south can be just astounding. So they offer something for everyone, both in the spring and the fall.
That's so true. Thank you.
Well, I will jump in with my question next. Hi, John. I'm Kate, the Communications Director here at Sycamore Land Trust. And my question is, in this digital age of birding email lists, eBird, and birding social media groups, it's all too easy for people to share a location of a highly sought after bird species or other details. And I'm curious if you have any top ethical birding recommendations for us to share with our audience to make sure that we're adequately protecting the bird species on our preserves.
That is a very great question, and it's something that I have wrestled with for many years. So I want to walk through it. First of all, I think we have to start out by saying practice common sense. Okay. I think if we do that, it makes it so much easier to kind of figure out what we need to do. So for most migrants or other unusual bird sightings, I think it's okay to share location and other details of the sighting. So, you know, this might be your first Tennessee warbler of the spring, your first greater yellowlegs returning in the fall and early July. it's okay to say, hey, I just saw greater yellowlegs. It's July 3rd. They already seem to be coming back from the north. I don't see a problem with that. However, once we start getting into endangered or threatened species or species which could otherwise be disturbed easily, and in that sense, I'm thinking of like the rail. You pointed out the rail this morning. They're in a very discrete area. It's in a marsh. There's probably not that many places where that bird's going to be. And if you have dozens and dozens of people traipsing through the marsh in hip waders looking for the bird, that's probably not a good thing. If you have a rare owl that comes in, it's roosting in a tree. It's probably going to select the same roosting spot every day. Depending on how rare that owl might be, I will never share the precise location of it, because I know that if I do, everybody and their brother is going to go to that same little tree and be looking up at it and flashing pictures and everything else. So in those instances, I will not share specific location information if I feel doing so might jeopardize the health or the safety of the bird.
Yes, that's a very good point. Thank you for that.
If I could jump in, John, and when you mentioned owls, that really resonated. I remember a time, oh gosh, it's probably pushing 20 years ago now, because we're all getting old, but it was, believe long-eared owls. A handful of them were roosting in a location nearby in our area, and that was a really rare thing. And the word got out a little bit, and some folks were very respectful and some folks were not, and those owls were flushed and didn't come back. So yeah, that's a good case in point of what you're talking about. We all want to share the experience of seeing these really neat rare birds, but we don't want to disturb them either. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Also, I have one more question that I think to wrap up our time here today. And hopefully it ties back into what we were talking about a little bit during your presentation.
Okay.
John, what are the most important steps to take to involve urban and minority youth in bird watching and other nature-based activities? You touched on it, but do you have, what are the top things that really, you would recommend?
Yeah, this is a question that has been raised ever since my book came out in 2008. I get this question at almost everywhere that I speak. So I think the first opportunity that you want to take is, if possible, try to partner with a local ambassador or role model or mentor. So for example, if you're in Texas, you've got a large Hispanic community that you're targeting, you're trying to get more young Hispanic boys and girls to get involved in nature and the outdoors. Maybe you're going to look for an adult in that community who is like-minded and can be that intermediary that helps you reach into that community. Same thing if you're in Philadelphia, you're trying to reach that Black neighborhood, finding a local African-American man or woman who can help you reach into that community with your message and bring people to what you're presenting, which is a conservation message about Sycamore Land Trust, and more broadly, enjoyment of nature and the outdoors. Having that person help you, and you're basically leveraging their trust. So the people in their community trust them, and now you're leveraging that trust to bring that trust to you as well. if you're, and for those people who are watching this who maybe are not part of a nonprofit like you are, so if you're an individual, you should consider partnering with a nonprofit group like Sycamore Land Trust. But whether you're an individual or a nonprofit group, I think both of those opportunities should think about partnering with local schools, because this is where you can actually have a big impact, starting around the 3rd grade, working with, again, like-minded teachers and having discrete touches 2 or 3 times a year, starting in the 3rd grade, and you go back in the 4th grade and then the 5th grade, and you're contacting these same students year after year, reminding them of this opportunity to explore nature and the outdoors. I think that is really great. And if you can't partner with a local school, maybe think about partnering with a local state or federal agency. And then it's about organizing and promoting a birding or nature-based activity. So how much snow do you get in the area where you're at? It's probably not much, right?
Not enough.
Yeah, so you probably have opportunities for birdwatching activities year round. And you could schedule one for the spring during the spring migration, one for the summer during breeding bird season, maybe doing a breeding bird survey, and maybe one for the fall, when the ducks and the geese and the swans or cranes or whatever is migrating through. Late November is a great time to go out, or even a Christmas bird count. So organizing and promoting a type of nature-based activity is great. And the last thing that you want to think about is how to keep the flame burning. Because remember, each time we touch one of these kids, we're almost like lighting a candle flame. And if we never reach out to that child again, if we never invite them back to another opportunity, that flame can just wither away and die, and then it's gone. And so you have to look and plan for ways to bring these young boys and girls or young adults back for similar recurring activities over time. And it's that repeat exposure that's going to keep their interest level in what you're doing, keep that interest at a high level, and it will also facilitate self-motivating behavior. Well, eventually the flame will be burning on its own. So that's the analogy that we're looking at there.
Thank you. That was very important and from things to take into consideration. And I'm very appreciative.
Okay.
Well, it's been a delightful experience getting to see you talk and getting some questions answered. And just can't thank you enough, John, for your time today. On behalf
Wonderful.
of Sycamore and everybody that gets a chance to watch this is going to be a valuable resource for everybody. So thank you so much.
You are most welcome, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it for you. I'll go ahead and stop the screen share now.
Thank you.